Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 129, Pop Sherlock.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Pow, pow, pow! Hey, trying to pop everything but the mic on that one. Welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first Sherlockian podcast where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And we are pleased to welcome you to this episode where we're trying not to have too many plotives into the microphone as we talk about Pop Sherlock. And, you know, this couldn't be more appropriate because this show and this website, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, has always been dedicated to the intersection of Sherlock Holmes and popular culture. And
yeah, even before that was a thing, folks, we were doing that.
Yeah. I mean, well, culture may be popular, but we're not. Something like that.
In our desperate search for popularity, we stumbled across Sherlock Holmes, and we've been stumbling ever since.
Well, it should be a fascinating discussion. And after we're done with this episode of Pop Sherlock, I'm sure you're going to want to join us on the next episode, which is Mom Sherlock. No?
And then Uncle Sherlock.
Yeah. Oh, boy. Well, it should be fascinating. So, hey, you've been with us once or twice before. Maybe you've been with us for this entire run of an insane 129 episodes. How about showing us some love? We would absolutely welcome your patronage here on the show. We have a couple of ways for you to show your support to help us pay for the things that actually cost money, the bandwidth that we eat up, the email servers that we have to pay for to get the message out, to let people know that we're here. Even the places where we host our sounds, those all require funding. And our sponsors do some of that, and we thank them for that, but it's not always enough. So we would love to get your input, your throughput, anything you can put into
your output.
Yeah. Your output. Anything you can put from your pocket into ours, we would appreciate.
Yeah, don't put out the cat our way, though, because we can't really feed him or her.
But we have a lovely orange button on the website that invites you to become a patron of the arts here. That'll send you over to a site called Patreon, which is a really neat way for you to only fund what we make. If we don't make an episode, we don't charge you. It's as simple as that. It's a recurring kind of thing. Or if you're not into Patreon, if you can't quite wrap your head around that, which it's kind of like subscribing to a newspaper, you pay as long as it shows up at your door. But if that's too much for you, that's fine. PayPal. Everybody can figure out PayPal. We've got lots of folks that do that. as well. And we wanted to just throw a shout out to Rochelle Scorgi, to Scott Dawson and Linda Hine, Bonnie McBird, Diana Williams, James O'Leary, Martin Schwartz, Michael Bush, John Raby, who else do we have? Terry Hunt. You have all been generous to a fault, and we wanted to thank you for that.
God bless you all.
Indeed. And there's, there may be more. The credits are rolling by too quickly, but these are folks that have stepped up $5 or more per episode, so we thank them for that. And also, if you want to leave us a rating or review, if you don't want to send us money, the next best thing you can do is to send a note to your podcast subscription service of choice, whether it's iTunes or Google Play or Spreaker or Stitcher or iHeartRadio or SoundCloud. Let people know what you think of the show by leaving a rating and a review. That would help us out and please us to no end.
Yes, and it's easy to do. For example, if you want to leave a review for us on iTunes, all you have to do is open up that Steam-driven browser on your computer and type in bit.ly, bit.ly, / I Hear of Sherlock, and voila, you'll be right there at the review spot.
That's amazing.
It's astonishing.
I mean, I don't even have to pick up the phone?
No, but you can pick up the phone to call us and give us feedback at 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323.
I love it. And of course, there's always email. There's always leaving us a comment on the show notes, which are available at ihose.co/ihose129, all lowercase, ihose.co/ihose129. If you want to leave us a comment specifically about our conversation here today. And email works, comment at IHearOfSherlock.com. This social space, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, those are our main places where you'll find us. And you know what? If that's not enough for you, send us a needlepoint. I mean, that's just about all we've got left at this point.
Well, friends, if that time machine you're working on in the garage works, you could send us a telex or a cable to Sherlock at America. Just cable us Sherlock America and we'll get it. Or the transatlantic wires.
Indeed. Well, it doesn't take a transatlantic wire to get in touch with these fine folks.
The ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex is looking forward to the fall harvest, when our peasants work in our fields, cut timber, haul water, spin and weave, and we collect their tithes, every 10th egg, sheaf of wheat, lamb, chicken, and all the other animals. The peasant's lot is hard, but you can relax with your copy of a curious collection of dates through the year with Sherlock Holmes, highlighting every day with significant events from the Sherlockian universe. Available right now from our WesExpress.com. No faint and hesitating trill, such tribute as to winter chill the lonely redbreast pays, clear, loud, and lively is the din from social warblers gathering in. But you can tune it all out when you reach for the pleasure only a volume from the West Express provides. Choose yours today.
Well, it's always thrilling coming back from a visit to Wessex because, frankly, I never know what to expect.
Me neither. I just hope they get the thatches on those cottages secured before, the colder weather in November and December.
That is true. Well, they didn't have to contend with anything like hurricanes, did they?
No, I don't think so. Oh. Sugar canes were a delicacy. I remember that.
Dancing in people's heads, at least.
Yes.
Well, you don't want to hear about the weather. You don't want to hear any more of us blathering on. Let's get right to our guest. We are thrilled to be joined by Peggy Perdue, who is known as Violet Westbury in the Baker Street Irregulars. And Peggy, for some time, has been the librarian at the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection at the Toronto Public Library, specifically the Toronto Reference Library location. It's an absolutely marvelous place. It's got one of the world's foremost collections of library materials devoted to the life and work of Conan Doyle, and you can even step into the Arthur Conan Doyle room up there on the 5th floor of the library. And of course, you'll see more than just Sherlock Holmes material. Conan Doyle, of course, wrote much more than that. Of course, he's got material related to spiritualism and true crime and history and current events of his day, and you will find all of that at the Toronto Public Library in the ACD collection. And of course, Peggy has headed that up for a good dozen years or so. She's now moved on to another position, but still has it lovingly in her hands. And more importantly, she's here to talk with us, too, about a new exhibition about popular culture and Sherlock Holmes, aptly entitled Pop Sherlock. So let's go visit with Peggy. So, Peggy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Well,
thanks for having me.
Oh, you're very welcome. We have to tell you, we are thrilled that you could join us because, you're one of these people that has just woven in and out of our Sherlockian experience for the better part of the last 2 decades, I want to say. You're, as we noted, you are employed by the Toronto Reference Library, and have had a fascinating job there as the librarian who has specifically been in charge of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. Now, you've curated all of the exhibits and everything there. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that role, how you first got it and how long you were in it?
Well, I started with the Toronto Public Library in 2002, and it's the kind of organization where you want to get in, and then once you're in, you look around and you see what would you like to do in the long run. And I soon set my sights on the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection, but that was it did seem a bit of a pipe dream because
I see what you did there.
I'm sorry?
I see what you did there.
Well, yes, indeed. But people hung on to the job. I'm actually only the 3rd person in the history of the collection who's had that job.
Really?
It was Cameron Hollier first. It was then Victoria Gill, and then when she retired, I got my shot at it, and I did get the job in 2005. I think that probably for many listeners, they could appreciate that a full-time job devoted to Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes was a dream. I got to do so many wonderful things. I got to buy things for the collection and build it and create this, continue to create this space that people could visit and really have, I think, I know, Scott, at least you've been to the Arthur Conan Doyle room. Is that right? I
have, yeah.
And Bert, I don't know if you have.
No, sadly, not yet.
Okay, well, we're waiting for you. But it's people love it. It's sort of like walking into an experience of literature. I mean, I love it. You can tell that. But I've also got to curate exhibitions. Do reference work from, get emails from around the world with people who want to use the resources of the collection, and then there was this wonderful bonus side of the Sherlockian world, which I had no idea existed when I got the job, and meeting all these wonderful people.
What was the path for you, Peggy? What were you doing before 2005? How did you get into library science?
Well, it's one of these checkered paths, to be sure. Houndstooth. I don't know. See what I did. But
Prince. I think it was a Prince of Wales check.
Oh, come on.
I started with an undergraduate degree in Asian studies, and then I worked for my first job was at a coffee company, a Japanese coffee company in Rockefeller Center, and then I married a Canadian and moved to Toronto, worked for another Japanese company, and then we both got our degrees in, or we got our diplomas in teaching English as a second language. Did that in Taiwan for a little while, and then I decided that rather than be in front of the classroom, I thought I might like to be a librarian and help people with their research, rather than sort of stand up in front of the classroom and tell them things.
Were you a New Yorker? Where were you born?
I was born in Staten Island.
Ah.
Yeah, and raised there and in New Jersey. So, well, anyway, the short story is that I worked in Asian studies libraries for a while, but it was mostly contract work, and I got the job at the Toronto Public Library. I did get a Master Library Science degree in there somewhere, and the focus there had been on rare books and special collections.
And when did you first come across Sherlock Holmes in your life? Did you encounter Sherlock Holmes when you were younger?
Younger, yes, but I was in my mid-20s or early 20s, I guess, at the time. It was in Japan, and that was my last year of that degree in Asian studies, and I was an exchange student from Rutgers University, and I was at Fukui University in Japan. And after 3 years of studying Japanese in New Jersey, where it is not widely spoken, I landed in this total immersion experience, and where all my classes were in Japanese, and most of my daily life was. So I was looking through the school library for a little bit of light English reading, just for some downtime, and there was a paperback collection of all of the short stories of the canon, and and I remember thinking that I would sort of ration them out because they were short stories and just read maybe one a night, and that of course didn't last that long. and then shortly after, a couple of American friends of mine got a care package of VHS tapes, and and quite a few of them were the Granada Jeremy Brett series. So that really sort of locked it down too.
Oh yeah,
fascinating. Have you ever read any of these Sherlock Holmes stories in Japanese?
No. I prefer to read in the original. So, but I do get I really quite enjoy the scholarship that comes out of Japan. There's such a lot of it, and we get wonderful donations from the Japanese Sherlockians as well.
Now, Japan is known for having a huge Sherlockian society, some thousands of people in the Japan Society of Sherlock Holmes. Did you ever get a chance to interact with Japanese Sherlockians when you were over there, or go to meetings or anything like that?
Well, this was quite a while when I was a student there. It was quite a while ago, and I enjoyed the Holmes stories, but it never would have occurred to me to seek out a group of people and talk about them. Wow. But after when I became the librarian for the Toronto collection, I noticed all these Japanese books on the shelves and found out about the club, and so I have been to some of their meetings on trips back to Japan, have quite a lot of friends in the Japanese society there.
Yeah,
I think you've probably met some of them in New York. They are fabulous people, very enthusiastic and learned Sherlockians. They certainly are.
So you mentioned as you were kind of giving your introduction about your history at the Toronto Public Library, that is where the Sherlockian world first kind of dawned on you. So when do you remember the first Sherlockian Society meeting you went to? Where was it?
Oh, well, that would have been the Bootmakers of Toronto, of course, our local society.
Nicely done.
And they, in fact, they came to me first, and they explained to me about the society, and they told me that I was the left shoehorn. Because the curator of the collection is always the left shoehorn. And of course, everybody in the Bootmakers executive has a shoe related name. But so I went to the meeting, and I enjoyed. It was completely new to me. I'd never joined any sort of literary club.
I didn't know that about the Bookmakers. Is there a tongue at the Bootmakers? Is there a lace at the Bootmakers?
Yes.
Is there a heel? I would aspire to be the heel.
There is a heel. But I forget what role that is. But yes, there's a polish, and that's the person who does like the PR. And there is, or is that the tongue? I've got it all confused now, but yes, there are.
So, is there a right shoehorn? Since you're the left shoehorn, is there a right shoehorn?
The right shoehorn, and again, I'm sorry, I did not prepare a list of these names for this interview, right. But I think the right shoehorn is is sort of the president in waiting. But I
would have thought that would have been the sock.
Oh, get out of here!
I don't know. My bootmaker friends are really going to get on me about why didn't you memorize the list, Peggy? Why did you not memorize the list?
Oh, come on! Don't be forgiving.
You can tell I fascinate easy by these things.
Yeah. Yeah. If anything, they're going to get on Bert for this.
Yes, as usual.
we may not be able to make it north at this rate. So Peggy, you've actually had a job change recently. Sounds like something of a promotion. You want to tell us about that?
Yes, it is a promotion. So I've moved into it's more of a supervisory position where I'm working with, all the curators of the special collections at the reference library location for that department. We do have two other special collections, just to briefly mention. One is the Merrill collection of science fiction and fantasy and speculative literature, and the Osborne collection of early children's books. They both, by the way, have Sherlockian connections, but they're in a different location. But I'm working with still the Arthur Conan Doyle collection, of course. How far? I couldn't go far, of course, but also the collections of Canadian manuscripts and early printed books, the documentary art collection. We also have some sort of what you would normally associate with rare book collections, like incunabula, early printed and manuscript maps. Wonderful collections. Anyway, it's adding a lot of variety to what I'm doing.
It sounds wonderful.
Well, book people like yourselves would certainly enjoy delving into these collections.
Yeah. So personally, I have to wonder, the job that you've held for the last 12 years, it's a dream job for anyone who is remotely a Sherlockian. But after 12 years, day in and day out, minding the same collection, even though you were adding to it, you were curating and hosting exhibits and whatnot, did it wear off? I mean, did the shine wear off, and did it get a little too monotonous at times, or did it still have that kind of sheen that it originally had?
It's funny because I was probably I've done the job for 12 years, and it was maybe a couple of years in that I started to wonder, would I still be able to go to that well and come back with ideas? Because, right. I was writing a regular column for different publications and doing these presentations and doing exhibitions. And I thought this well has got to run dry at one point. But I found, like I think so many Sherlockians have found, that well doesn't run dry. We just keep finding new things to say about Sherlock Holmes. So I I really wouldn't say that I got at all bored of it. But I think it might be accurate to say that I started to feel a little bit like Basil Rathbone probably did. Like I think I could probably do something else, and maybe it doesn't have to be Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle all the time. So
fair enough.
What about your feelings about Conan Doyle?
That's a very personal question, Bert.
Well, we get to the heart of the matter here. We hold back nothing at I Hear of Sherlock. But, because I imagine, like most of us, your early framework, your frame of reference for Conan Doyle, was not certainly as refined as it is now after 12 years and everything that's been written about him. What's your sense of Conan Doyle as an author, as a personality, as a figure?
I tend to think of him ultimately as a very honorable and earnest man, and so and that's helped because I've spent a lot of time in his company and promoting his legacy. Conan Doyle himself has certainly become a real object of fascination for me. One thing I love is all of these fiction stories and also television shows and things like that have been that are starting to be created and have been created for some while about Arthur Conan Doyle, because I think it really just turns that the great game on its head. Like, we'll have people talking about excuse me, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this on this podcast, but we have people talking about fictional characters as if they're real. But excuse me. But then with these, there's just dozens now of fictional works based on Arthur Conan Doyle or using him as a character. And so now we have this real person who is being turned into a fictional one. So there's a sort of a wonderful play with that.
Mm. I like those words, you use about Conan Doyle, honorable and earnest. I think that's very accurate.
I'm glad you agree.
Well, there is a fascinating exhibit that is going on. It opened on August 19th, and it runs through October 22nd at the main level of the Toronto Reference Library. It is called Pop Sherlock, and it acknowledges Sherlock Holmes as the ultimate pop culture icon. And I know we here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere are pleased with that, because this show and the website that we have run for the better part of 10, 12 years has always been about the intersection of Sherlock Holmes and popular culture. And according to the description, Pop Sherlock documents Holmes's role as an icon that has lasted generations and spanned the globe, showcasing a wide variety of his appearances in films, television, comic books, and advertising. So, Peggy, I thought, why don't we first start with the idea behind this kind of an exhibit, and then I want to delve specifically into some of those topics with you. So, where did the germination come from?
Well, I had originally proposed a comic book and graphic novel show, and because I happen to love that part of the collection, and discussing it with some of my coworkers, there was a sense that might be a little bit too niche. So we have one author, one character, one format. So although there undoubtedly would have been people who would have loved to see an all comic show, we have to try to make it a little bit broader, something that would appeal to a general public as well. We are, after all, a public library. So that played with it a little bit and kept a lot of the idea of this graphic Sherlock Holmes, and also sort of played around with the idea of connections between pop culture and pop art. And, if you think about Andy Warhol and his work in celebrity culture and, the reproducibility of certain iconic images. And, so it turned into, and I think in the end we got actually quite a lot of comic, art and comic books and things in there. So it did keep that kernel, but it also included all these other, areas and other formats where Sherlock Holmes has had such great success. And when we say the ultimate pop icon, I think the core message we're trying to deliver was somebody who is actually like a meta icon, like an icon's icon, and that there are all these other famous faces and famous brands that actually benefit from getting a kind of a fist bump from Holmes.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that perfect segue into one particular area interest of yours, and it ties specifically to the 2009 Baker Street Journal Christmas Annual, which, as Johnny Carson would say, I hold in my hand.
Oh, do you?
It was specifically, it was called, "Do You Notice Nothing Curious About that Advertisement?" And it is Sherlock Holmes in advertising.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Figure 2. A detail of a flyer for Tux Enema. All right. So we get right into it. Where did the idea come from for advertising? Has that been a personal interest of yours, or is it a major feature of the collection?
No, I wouldn't say so. It was it came out of a conversation with Steve Rothman in Otto Penzler's bookstore. How many of these Christmas annuals started that way? We could ask.
That's great.
He said, "Well, could you do a Christmas annual with something in the collection?" And I started to think about things that I didn't think had been fully covered. Again, going back to the idea of what has not been done.
Yeah.
And although there were definitely some shorter works about Holmes and advertising, I just thought it would be great to do and yes, of course, you can only do this sort of thing if you start to take a personal interest in it. But so the challenge of getting as many of these ads as I could find, mm-hmm. I wound up looking at about 400 of them.
Wow!
And then there were
those are all in the collection.
Most of them were in the collection. Others I found other places in the library through periodical searches, and then I also looked at the New York Public Library.
Okay.
For some, I was looking through like the New York Times, trying to find some other major sources that might have ones that we had missed. But I mean, the core of it was still what we had in the collection, and also a letter that we have from Arthur Conan Doyle to Herbert Greenhouse Smith, his editor in the Strand, mm-hmm. in which the Christmas Annual has this in full. You'll see it since you have it, but there's a part where he's discussing with Smith the idea that's been pitched to him to have an ad using Sherlock Holmes, and it says in it that he didn't like the picture that was sent to him, and he said Holmes must preserve his dignity, and that was what I chose to juxtapose next to that enema ad, because I admit to being of a frivolous turn of mind sometimes.
Well, that when you consider that he was irregular
You're so right. You've really gotten to the heart of the issue.
I think you've gotten to the bottom of it.
Oh, hey!
Yes,
Wow.
even better, yes.
Oh, I'm feeling a little flushed myself.
Yes. But he is dignified in some of the ads, and then some he's not.
Now, in searching for these ads, I mean, all the sources that you mentioned, did you come across any Sherlockians who have a specialty of collecting that includes Sherlock Holmes advertisements?
After the fact.
Really?
Yeah. So there was one person whose name I do not remember who said to me after, "Oh, by the way, I have a bunch of ads," but that wasn't really a route that I went down, and I thought 400 was a good sample, so yeah. I think it's okay.
Yeah, it's too bad they couldn't all be placed in the annual, but there are some good ones here. We've got Clausen's presents The Case of the Purloined Pickles, with a mustachioed Sherlock Holmes rubbing his chin and looking inside of a pickle jar. We've got Air India to London, gives you the best of both possible worlds, and you've got Sherlock Holmes next to an Indian woman there. I don't think I recognize who the Sherlock Holmes was. It looks like on page 28 here, we've got a Japanese ad. Do you remember that one from?
Oh, yes, that was Ace Holmes. That was it's
a real estate.
Actually, see that pun works pretty well. Yes, the Holmes pun works actually even a little bit better in Japanese than it does in English. So there were a couple of Japanese real estate ads in my sample.
Oh, that's great. And of course we've got Burberry's, we've got the Bell Yellow pages. And interestingly enough, it ends with a Collier's ad from 1904 for the Doyle Literary Agency. Mm-hmm. Any relation?
That was, I don't know. I know it wasn't, but that was just a little flourish at the end because I knew the Sherlockians would enjoy seeing a Doyle literary agency.
That's wonderful. Now, speaking of Japan, and of course your interest, certainly your undergrad in Asian studies and your time over in Japan, on the Toronto Public Library website, on the announcement for Pop Sherlock, there's a wonderful shot of and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation, perhaps you can correct me, a Maneki Neko Sherlock Holmes?
Yes.
What is that?
That was donated by one of our Japanese friends, Nobuo Yamamoto, and it's you must have seen those cats at the you see them sometimes in either Chinese or Japanese restaurants, and they're called it's a beckoning cat, and so it's sort of beckoning good fortune. Oh. But I mean, they just did the old, deerstalker and pipe thing, which allows you to turn almost anything into Sherlock Holmes. I mean, have you ever seen that VeggieTales book where Holmes is a cucumber?
Yes.
Yeah. And all you need is a deerstalker and a magnifying glass.
And of course, if Holmes is the cucumber, then his plump sidekick must be the tomato. So
yes, and that was totally a Nigel Bruce call out, don't you think? That tomato.
Of course it was. Oh, so we've got advertisements, we've got 3D collectibles and tchotchkes. What else can you call out that's in the Pop Sherlock collection that stands out to you?
Oh well, sort of going back to the comic books, we do have hundreds of them in the collection, and just the floppies alone, and then there's the graphic novels as well. But so we had to sort of, for one case, narrow that down somehow, and we chose the superheroes theme.
Oh.
And one thing that was particularly interesting to me is that Holmes has been borrowed by both the DC and the Marvel universes. So that's quite an honor for him, I think.
Yeah.
But then I think my favorite, or one of my favorite items in the show is also in that case, because it's a Kiss, the band Kiss comic, which the band members all get superpowers, and they sort of travel through time and space fighting evil, and they come across this dinosaur called Saurian Holmes, and he's a dinosaur with basically a deerstalker and a magnifying glass. But I thought, how far removed from the original work is this?
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things I was looking for. How far removed can we get? Well, I think it would be a toss between Saurian Holmes, the dinosaur Holmes, and one thing that I actually brought back from a trip to Japan earlier this year, which is a little figurine called Oshiritante, which sort of translates into Inspector Buttocks. And
wow.
It's a rear end with a deerstalker cap, and it solves mysteries. So,
wow.
So I told you, a frivolous turn of mind, but, okay, so I'm being silly now, but let's see. We do also have, there's a great section on film, which includes a selection of film posters, and we have a couple of the original scripts from the Basil Rathbone films.
Oh, wow.
One of them I think is quite interesting. It's a script for a movie called Sherlock Holmes in Canada. And right next to it, we have put the press release for the end product. And the end product was called The Scarlet Claw.
How about that? Yeah.
Yes. And I just love to think of that Hollywood boardroom where they all sat around and said, Sherlock Holmes in Canada. Do you think that's going to bring the punters in?
Yeah.
How about the Scarlet Claw? And then there's of course, there's television and plays, theater. Mm-hmm. We've got we have a playbill for one of the a 1905 production of the Gillette play Sherlock Holmes, where Charlie Chaplin plays the role of Billy.
That's right.
Yeah, so all these famous faces, sometimes even before they became famous.
Yeah. Now, is there anything in this exhibit that is interactive or tactile? In other words, that people can actually pick up or touch or anything? I mean, obviously, you want to protect these things because they're part of a collection, but is there anything that's a little more interactive for the visitor?
Yes, and this is something we did specifically want to do because we really are presenting a kind of a people's Sherlock Holmes, who's your Sherlock kind of approach. And so we have, we originally talked about doing one of those boards where, you stick your face in and Sherlock Holmes board and then your face is sticking out of it. I don't know what they're called. But what we wound up, our gallery designer, who is fantastic, Katie Muth, came up with these little, a hat, all the icons, right? The hat, the magnifying glass, and the pipe. And so you can sort of hold them up and take selfies and things like that. And then of course the idea was for people to share them on social media and things like that. So that's one thing. And then there's also a touch screen which uses as, to use library jargon, it's reader's advisory. So, which is when you try to, people have like a certain kind of book and you try to suggest something that they might like to read. So, for people who were looking to experiment with pastiche, we gave them a kind of a flow chart where they can say, okay, well, I would like to read, maybe some classic pastiche or a kind of a genre crossover, and then that path will eventually choose your adventure kind of thing would lead them to a suggested book that they might like.
That's wonderful.
So those are the interactive.
Yeah. The gift that keeps on giving. I love it.
For those of our listeners who might not know, Peggy, how does the collection come to be in Toronto?
Well, it started in 1969 when the library bought a small collection of books from a local antiquarian bookseller, and they had a lot of first edition Holmes and generally Conan Doyle books, and staff were starting to talk about, hey, that would make a kind of an interesting special collection, since Conan Doyle, wrote in so many different areas, and to try to bring them together into one collection. And while that, more or less exactly the same time that was happening, Donald Redmond showed up at the head librarian's office and said, you guys just bought these books. Now you've got to do something with them. And so he was, and there was just there was a lot of momentum, and we acquired some other collections that were available at the time. And then the first Arthur Conan Doyle room opened to the public in 1971. And people often ask why Toronto. Sometimes they say, "Oh, is Arthur Conan Doyle Canadian, or was Sherlock Holmes Canadian?" But I just tell them that this is very much an international phenomenon, and so Holmes, thrives where people love him, I think is fair to say. And sometimes I point out that the largest North American collection is actually in Minnesota, so why not Toronto too?
Yeah, and Toronto is just such a wonderful international city. I mean, you've certainly got a lot of the influence from Great Britain, from the earlier colonial days. But it's such a wonderful metropolitan area, world class, and perfect place to visit, right?
Well, as my adopted city, I do love it.
Well, you're very lucky. You're very lucky. So, speaking of international and leaving the city, you had an opportunity in recent weeks to do just that, and to travel internationally with a group of other Sherlockians. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes. Let's see. It was at some point last year, maybe even around the BSI weekend from not January, but even earlier, I started to hear about these linked conferences where the Reichenbach irregulars were planning to have a conference in Meiringen, and the Italian Sherlockian Society, Uno Studio in Holmes, was planning to celebrate their 30th anniversary with a conference in Florence. And as I'm sure you will remember, in the empty house, Holmes, when he has to explain his why he's alive to Watson, he talks about how he escaped from Moriarty and his minions and scrambled his way through the Alps. And he finishes the account by saying, "A week later, I found myself in Florence." So these wonderful European Sherlockians had a conference at Reichenbach Falls, and then a week later, exactly, a conference in Florence. So you've just got to love that idea.
Yeah.
And, and I just really wanted to be a part of that. So, I did manage to get to both of them, which was very lucky. And yeah, we had Sherlockians from all over, from North America, Europe, Japan as well. What else might you like to know about it? It was good fun was had by all.
Yeah, right. So I would imagine you connected with some of your known Sherlockian accomplices in Japan who were there.
Yes, there were 10 people from Japan at the Meiringen conference, but there were also oh gosh, if I start to name names, then I'll forget somebody, won't I?
All right, yeah.
But there were great people from Minnesota. We had Julie and Mike McCurris, and we had Dick Sveum and Jennifer Olson. John Lellenberg and his wife Susan were there. A lot of names that people
Sure.
are listeners will know. From Toronto, we also had Cliff and Doris Goldfarb and Hartley and Marilyn Nathan. Who am I forgetting?
That's all right.
But Catherine Cook was there. Guy Marriott was there. And then, of course, the Swiss and the Italians as well.
So is it different programming in each location?
Yes, it was. It was different. They were both. The presentations were tied to the location to a large extent.
Okay.
So in Switzerland, there was quite an interesting variety of presentations on how exactly Holmes would have gotten through the Alps with no supplies and no knowledge of the paths and in the dark. And there were some quite creative solutions to that. In Italy, there were some of them were looking back over the 30 years, and then there were activities and papers related to Holmes' time in Florence.
It's wonderful. Sounds like the trip of a lifetime.
It was great, and I know at least that the Swiss Society is planning on doing another one in 2019, and I would not mind taking another deco at Switzerland if I could.
Yeah. Now, was that your first time in both locations?
No, it was my first time in Switzerland, but I've managed to spend some time in Italy, which is very nice.
Wonderful. Well, and as we know, you go to any of these places and there are Sherlockians all around. It's like Rotary. You find your local representative and they'll make you happy. No doubt.
Yes, definitely. And, they say that it's a truism that everybody brings what the other thing they love to Sherlock Holmes. And for me, I've always really been interested in languages and other cultures. And so it's fantastic to be able to connect that with Sherlock Holmes.
Absolutely.
So what's in store for you in the months and the years ahead? Have you, as the library, begun thinking about what might be on the agenda 2018 and beyond?
Well, we've got to get somebody in the Conan Doyle job, and then I would only have one job, so that would be nice. But that'll probably be within the next month. But I don't. And people all want a name, but I can't give them a name yet. The name is still me. So that'll be, that'll be a priority, of course. But then another thing that's happening and that's been ongoing is our digitization project. So we're trying to make more of the collection accessible in that way.
Oh boy! So how far along are you with digitization?
Well, we had, let's see, we really just started with the Conan Doyle Collection a couple of years ago because the first priority were some of the older Canadian materials, but now we're definitely right into the ACD collection. We have if you go into our website or check our digital archive and you type in, say, Arthur Conan Doyle and look for images, you'll find a lot of our photos that we have in the collection of Arthur Conan Doyle. We have photos of his time in Canada, but also of his Mediterranean honeymoon, and some of his spiritualist travels through Australia and Asia. So there's that. We were just recently. Do you know those European pulps they started out as Sherlock Holmes, being Sherlock Holmes stories, and they were attributed to Arthur Conan Doyle. But then, of course, he said, I didn't write those. Well, those are actually very hard to come by, but we have a very complete collection of them. So we're working our way through digitizing those, and there will be more to come.
That's great.
Fascinating. So once you hire your replacement, do you have to give up the left shoehorn?
I don't mind the idea of just sort of being a regular bootmaker. and so I think I might just pass that shoe. Now I'm not going to, of course I won't pass on my master bootmaker shoehorn because they gave that to me.
Okay,
but
good.
the sort of, the left shoehorn title, yes, I'll pass that on. That'll be fine.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure you weren't going to be without.
Oh, thank you. No, I don't you worry about me. I get my shoes on just fine.
Well, this has been an absolute delight, Peggy, talking with you about, your experience as a Sherlockian and your time in Japan, your storied career at the Toronto Public Library, and the new Pop Sherlock exhibition. If you folks, if you're listening and you want to attend, get yourself to Toronto before October 22nd and go to the Toronto Public Library, the Toronto Reference Library. It's in the TD gallery on the main level. It's called Pop Sherlock. And, if it's during the week, ask for Peggy. She might come down and give you a personal tour if you're a particularly dedicated Sherlockian.
I'd be delighted to.
Just tell them IHOSE sent you, and maybe that key code will get you in. Well, Peggy, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. This was so fun. I really enjoyed it, and gosh, I think you got me monologuing. I think you asked me as many questions about myself as about Sherlock Holmes, and that hasn't happened in 12 years. So.
Good.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That was a real treat. Peggy is somebody that I've always wanted to talk more with, other than the conversations that we tend to have in January every year, which are always nice, but it's nothing like this kind of conversation about the collection. And of course, lucky you've been there. On my next trip to Toronto, I've got to stop in. But one thing we didn't mention when we were talking with Peggy was the Friends of the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection at the Toronto Public Library.
Yes.
This is an independent group that works closely with the library to support the collection, and they maintain and enhance the collection and raise funds. And you, too, can become a friend. You can join. There are 4 different membership levels, and you get a copy of their newsletter, The Magic Door, and a copy of their current every year there's an annual lecture in honor of Cameron Hollier, the first curator, and every year you subscribers also get a copy of that lecture when it's published.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And we'll have links up to the Conan Doyle Collection and Pop Sherlock, and to the Friends of the ACD Collection. Absolutely great way to support what they do there. And I can't recommend enough getting up there to to Toronto and spending some good quality time. No matter what exhibition happens to be going on, if you don't make it by the time Pop Sherlock closes, there will be another exhibition related to Sherlock Holmes and Conan Doyle that they have on display. So it is well worth your time. The Baker Street Journal is published in the United States, but the scholarship and scholars included in those yellow-backed pages are international in scope. Matthias Bostrom, the Swedish Sherlockian and author, who joined us on episode 127, appears in the summer 27 issue of the Baker Street Journal in an article about Basil Rathbone's wife, Ouida. Did you know that she had a successful career in entertainment before she met Rathbone? And Mark Alberstadt, a Canadian and co-editor of Sherlock Holmes in Canada, which we covered in episode 121, tells us all about Conan Doyle's love of bicycling, which included regular rides of some 20 miles or more. From the United Kingdom, we read about what the obliquity of the ecliptic meant and how it indicated an earlier presence of Professor Moriarty, thanks to Mark Jones. As we've had the pleasure of discussing the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection in Toronto, it's a good opportunity to remember that the world of Sherlock Holmes scholarship and fandom doesn't begin and end within the confines of our own country. Sherlock Holmes is an international figure, and Sherlockian scholars inhabit the globe. For more opportunities to read about Sherlock Holmes from every corner, visit BakerStreetJournal.com and check out the lineup of books in the international series from the BSI Press. Pick out one or more that resonates with you and get your passport to international Sherlockian scholarship today. And, I didn't think to mention this during the show, but, we've been on a Canadian tear recently here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. On episode 121, we had Peter Calamai join us. And Peter has been a great correspondent with us and has given us some great feedback about the show. And we do appreciate that, Peter. But, of course, he was one of the editors of Canada and Sherlock Holmes. And wouldn't you know it, there's an article in here by Peggy Perdue.
Amazing.
It is What's Canadian in Canada's Arthur Conan Doyle Collection. So if you're interested in all things Canadian, this would be great because it is a lot of national pride going on in the Arthur Conan Doyle Collection there, as they rightly should have. Well, you mentioned Through the Magic Door. Why don't we step through our little magic door here and get those gas lamp tunes flowing? Oh, always a delight. So, Through the Magic Door is highly appropriate this time around because we do not have an editor's gas lamp. At least not an editor's gas lamp proper. Taking the place this time around will be a few paragraphs from Conan Doyle's own introduction to his Through the Magic Door.
I care not how humble your bookshelf may be, nor how lowly the room which it adorns. Close the door of that room behind you. Shut off with it all the cares of the outer world. Plunge back into the soothing company of the great dead. And then you are through the magic portal into that fair land whither worry and vexation can follow you no more. You've left all that is vulgar and all that is sordid behind you. There stand your noble, silent comrades waiting in their ranks. Pass your eye down their files. Choose your man. And then you have but to hold up your hand to him, and away you go together into dreamland. Surely there would be something eerie about a line of books were it not that familiarity has deadened our sense of it. Each is a mummified soul embalmed in cerecloth and natron of leather and printer's ink. Each cover of a true book enfolds the concentrated essence of a man. The personalities of the writers have faded into the thinnest shadows as their bodies into impalpable dust, yet here are their very spirits at your command. It is our familiarity also which has lessened our perception of the miraculous good fortune which we enjoy. Let us suppose that we were suddenly to learn that Shakespeare had returned to earth, and that he would favor any of us with an hour of his wit and his fancy. How eagerly we would seek him out. And yet we have him, the very best of him, at our elbows from week to week, and hardly trouble ourselves to put out our hands to beckon him down. No matter what mood a man may be in, once he has passed through the magic door, he can summon the world's greatest to sympathize with him in it. If he be thoughtful, here are the kings of thought. If he be dreamy, here are the masters of fancy. Or is it amusement that he lacks? He can signal to any one of the world's great storytellers, and out comes the dead man and holds him enthralled by the hour. The dead are such good company that one may come to think too little of the living. It is a real and a pressing danger with many of us that we should never find our own thoughts in our own souls, but be ever obsessed by the dead. Yet second-hand romance and second-hand emotion are surely better than the dull, soul-killing monotony which life brings to most of the human race. But best of all, when the dead man's wisdom and the dead man's example give us guidance and strength in the living of our own strenuous days. Come through the magic door with me, and sit here on the green settee, where you can see the old oak case with its untidy lines of volumes. Would you care to hear me talk of them? Well, I ask nothing better, for there is no volume there which is not a dear personal friend, and what can a man talk of more pleasantly than that? The other books are over yonder, but these are my own favorites, the one I care to reread and to have near my elbow. There is not a tattered cover which does not bring its mellow memories to me.
Well, how perfect. Perfect selection for this episode. And, you know, I was spellbound there hearing you read out loud the words of Conan Doyle and how he talks of books like old friends, like people who have passed beyond the ether. And it seemed at some point there, as you were reading, I could easily see the focus shifting from books to the occult and the afterlife, and how fluid his interest in both literature and spiritualism were by that point.
Yeah. It is fascinating, isn't it? I hadn't remembered that from that passage, and that's really only the briefest opening of his introduction. So his whole book is worth reading. He wrote it around 1906 or 7 through the Magic Door. I think it's widely available on old bookshop, or maybe even as print on demand. But the interesting thing is, yeah, you can really hear that, his sense of the dead and their interest and guidance and insight. Really fascinating. But he did write it. That was my point. He did write it before World War I and those tragedies. And what I always presumed was his greater interest in spiritualism.
Right. Wow.
But he was the sort of a young man, we know from his other writings and from the biographies, who would do without food to buy a special book every so often in his struggling days.
Yeah, that's right. Great. Well, if you've enjoyed us as much as Conan Doyle enjoyed his books, feel free to let people know and let us know. As we mentioned at the top of the show, feel free to reach out, leave us a review, leave us a comment, whatever floats your boat, and leave us some money if it so moves you. Any amount is fine. Don't be embarrassed. It's a work of a labor of love. It's an art form that we're creating here, and we are just sad, starving artists at this point. So, but we hope to return in just about 15 days' time with episode 130 with another interview with a fascinating Sherlockian. Who will it be? Well, we don't know. We don't plan that far in advance. But aren't you dying to know? We'll see you next time here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. And until the next time, I am regretfully going to remain Scott Monty.
I am perpetually Burt Wolder.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.